In today's dynamic and ever-changing world, we are trained to be global thinkers, but often it is easy to get lost in the variety of media and literature that is available to us. When I was younger, I repeatedly read books about characters that were profoundly contrasting compared to me. The little girls and boys on paper would consistently be Caucasian, with the quintessential blonde hair and green eyes. From a young age, we're exposed to the global, especially the so called Western world. The media that is presented to us plays a monumental role in the perception of culture. Growing up, when I only saw American and European children in my books, I was unintentionally and gradually disengaging from my roots and foundations, my Indian culture. This is why it is so consequential for us to appreciate and be proud of the literature that is created by India. It is absolutely essential for young readers to find characters and settings that speak to them and create a robust bond between young readers and the people born on paper. Coming up is a video of a student from the MYP speaking about her impressions of the Neev Book Award. After this, we will watch a reel of the books from the Junior Readers category that will headline the panel discussion moderated by Rasil Kaur Ahuja, co-founder, Neev Literature Festival, with the authors shortlisted in this category.
I'm going to be talking about how the Neev Book Awards are relevant for me. These books impact not only me, but the whole Neev community, since they have many different categories. These books are also very engaging and interesting reads and cover many topics, such as friendship or freedom.
Thank you, Mihika and Sanvi, for this lovely introduction on the importance of middle grade fiction. A warm welcome to the audience. And as a reminder, we will not be responding to any raised hands, but we definitely want to hear from you. So please enter your comments and questions in the Q&A box, and our authors will address these during the live Q&A part of the segment. And also detailed author bios will be available to you on the chat. And now for our guests of honor, the fabulous writers whose books are on this year's Neev Book Award shortlist, Junior Reader shortlist: A.B. Majmudar, Anupam Arunachalam, Aparna Karthikeyan, Deepa Agarwal, Devika Cariapa, and Nandita Basu. Welcome, welcome. I must first thank each of you individually, because while the past 18 months promised to be a very dull and a very much stay-at-home year, your books were a delightful surprise and escape. And thank you for those epic adventures you took us on, because otherwise we would have been couch potatoes and more potatoes than couch. So shall we get into it? Great. Let me start off with my first question, and this is going to go to A.B., otherwise known as Ami, the author of the mythological fantasy, The Torchbearer, who joins us from the US, where the sun has just risen. Ami, looking at the mix of genres in this year's shortlist, what trends is it representative of within children's literature for this particular age group? What can you tell us?
Oh gosh, it's amazing to see what we've done with this category. So we've got these historical mythological themed books, and I think we authors have somehow made our way into the musty, dusty corners of old libraries and illuminated new perspectives and children's perspectives on timeless stories from the past. And I think the trend is the widening of universes that a child can inhabit through her imagination and her experience. So whether we're dining miner's lamps, chasing a diamond, finding a piano, traveling to Lhasa or Hastinapur, or searching for the nectar of immortal life, we're doing it with this navigating by this constellation of stars in the child's imagination. And maybe it isn't even a trend. Maybe it's a characteristic of the best of children's literature to navigate the ocean of life with these starry skies of a child's world.
Thank you, Ami. You have definitely done your homework and read all the books on our shortlist. So someone else who's done a mythological retelling is with us, Anupam. Your book, The Young Pandavas, is actually a series of 3 so far. Mm-hmm. So what's trending these days in children's fiction, besides the beard, that is?
Thank you so much. In children's fiction, I think we're looking at, in Indian children's fiction, you see the literary landscape kind of reflecting the actual landscape more closely. Like we have a long way to go, but we are getting more diverse stories. We're getting so many new stories that we never heard before. In our category, I guess the trend seems to be to kind of like look at the past, recontextualize it, and sort of like present it to children in an interesting way. And I think that's really, really great.
It's lovely. Thank you. And I think, there's where there's myth, there's also mystery, and there's fantasy. And what I've noticed, especially in this collection, is that even stones can be shrouded in myth and fantasy. And we learned that in the Adventures of the Kohinoor. So Devika, besides big bauble fashion, what are the trends in middle grade nonfiction these days?
I like big bauble fashion. There seems to be a strong inclination to reach back into the past and make connections with the present. So whether they're issues or stories or themes, incidents, even very minor incidents that children can use to find meaning in their own, they find it relevant in their own lives. And when you think about history, it's a story of human development. So it's really not surprising that children are interested in the past. I always contend that they're naturally interested in the past. When you hear questions like, where have I come from? Have you always been here? They're trying to find their place in a story that began before they were born. That I think that's why these kind of stories and these kind of perhaps fiction, non-fiction are more and more popular now, more and more available, more and more read.
Which is great, actually, right? Because in order to really understand where you're going, you kind of have to know where you've been. And that sets a context for everything. And I think more importantly right now, what I'm also looking at in terms of trends is that nonfiction need not be dense. It need not be a textbook. And we see this also in the adventurous journey to a forbidden city, right, Deepa? And as someone who's authored over 50 books, what's the trend you've noticed in nonfiction for young people?
Well, first of all, I noticed that there is a vast variety of topics, whether it's about space travel or careers or, the biographical stories, which have always been popular in nonfiction, or whether even it's the, information about the pandemic. There is a vast variety of books in nonfiction available and for all ages, not just for the age group we are looking at. And apart from that, the way these books are narrated, the style is much more child-friendly. The attempt is to engage the reader. And as Devika also said, make it relevant to their lives. And actually, the focus is on, the reading pleasure of the child, not communicating the facts as such. The facts are made very exciting. And apart from that, there is also, the presentation of the book, which I find are getting more and more exciting, that the way they're illustrated, designed, and this is bringing children very close to information books that are, as fun to read as fiction.
I would 100% agree with you. In terms of presentation, I think our books have really reached a critical stage. We are just doing a much better job in terms of offering them different types of texts with illustrations, and not thinking that illustrations only belong for the younger age group. Actually, we all are visual learners in many ways. So it reinforces the text, in fact. So the one thing that I've also been seeing, and because we've all been, like I said, couch potatoes, watching lots of movies and lots of shows and documentaries, and these things that are inspired by true events just seem so much more compelling than, and I don't mean this, please don't take this badly or wrong way as someone who's written fiction, but they just seem very compelling in a way that it's relatable to the person who's watching. So No Nonsense Nandini is one of those. Aparna, by the way, I love the alliteration, no nonsense Nandini. But tell us, what's a trend you see in fictionalizing real life situations and real life individuals?
Yeah, I think it's, we're in a very interesting juncture. We are actually talking about our own lifespans, through books for children, which they otherwise wouldn't, get access to. So we're talking about the great processes of our time. I mean, I think if, you look at the set that No Nonsense Nandini belongs to, the Pari Karadi collaboration, we have some very important stories, all of which we saw, burst into our national scene, so to speak, in the last couple of years. We've had the farmers' protest, which No Nonsense Nandini feeds into. We've had the migrants, walking back during the lockdown, which is, one of the stories. And then we've had, Coming Home, which is again about migrants. And we've had people with children with HIV, and we have people with disabilities. We have these everyday people and their lives, everyday heroes. We are celebrating their lives through fiction, fictionalizing their life stories, so to speak. I think that fictionalizing just gives you a little bit of creative license, because when you do it in a non-fiction way, you have certain limitations, which we sort of do as journalists when we are reporting something. But, for a child, you do want to kind of make certain things a little bit easier. Like, for example, in No Nonsense Nandini, her life it's really, really difficult. And, it's a sort of tragedies that come back to back, that you feel bad actually saying it, so you want to make the real a little softer, at least in a book, because you can't make her real life softer, but at least in a book you want to present it a certain way. But that is a dilemma, right? I mean, are you saying that, somebody has survived that? So how do you actually tell a child that, listen, they've survived worse, but in this book, we're telling it to you in such a way that, they are able to cope with it, like bite-sized, issues, so to speak. So I think this, when children do see these real life heroes, they're able to understand, when farmers protest or gather in, the outskirts of Delhi, or when they see a newspaper headline or they see something in the news, they actually understand what's happening in the world around them. And I think that's a great starting point for them to actually reach out to their own, contemporaries who may not be from the same class, background as they are.
True. It gives them some context to events surrounding them today. And also, it doesn't have to be tomorrow that they're exposed to an article in the newspaper and they say, okay, I relate that to something. It can happen years down the road.
Correct.
And that's really our goal here. It's not about today and today's reading. It's your lifelong journey that these help you on. I'm going to talk about another trend that I know definitely people everywhere are talking about, graphic novels. And the piano story of a friendship is definitely on that track. So tell us about graphic novels, Nandita. Why are they so trendy these days?
Well, I think they've always been trendy everywhere else but in India. But the good part is the past few years, this graphic novel genre is like opening up tremendously. I mean, the kind of content and the subject and even the readership, it's just becoming like a really, really wide space. So I think, like the next few years, you'll see a huge boom in the Indian graphic novel scenario, which I think is tremendous because we have some really, really, talented authors and writers and even people who collaborate. So I think you're going to find a lot of awesome stories out there, and which is great because we've all, like people who have been following the graphic novel genre and trend, we have just grown up reading mostly stuff either from Europe or America or Japan, so it's time we read our own stuff. So I think that's a good thing happening there.
I like that. I like our stories, so I'm quite excited by reading more of our stuff. Which kind of now brings me to the next question, which I'm going to pose to all of you. Given the large gap that we have in terms of time, space, and experience between the book and the reader, and I think each of you has beautifully addressed the challenge of getting readers to feel a sense of closeness to characters, right? And not just the characters, but also the context. Now, these characters can be animate or inanimate. But if you had to mention one emotion that you hope readers would feel after reading your book, what would that emotion be? And let's just go in alphabetical order, starting with Ami.
Okay, so naturally I can't pick only one, but I'm gonna pick two close ones, or rather two contrasting ones. I hope my readers feel what I felt when I was a little girl listening to ancient stories, which was awe and comfort. so awe at this vastness of the mythological multiverse, as it were, this tremendous power of the goddess Kali, arms, weapons, and then, Vishnu, fast changing, fast talking, but also comfort that these powerful beings are also their friends, their guides, their protectors. And I really hope my readers enjoy hanging out with Ganesha and the gang, and that storytelling, story sharing flame, that torch, burns bright in all of their hearts, I guess. So.
Lovely. We'll move to Anupam.
So the Young Pandavas books are basically like children's adventure books, beyond being like mythological fantasy. And I would really like them to be page turners. So my hope is that their kids reading this are curious about, what happens next.
Well, curiosity is key. Otherwise, that's what we hope for. We hope to keep that flame alive. Aparna.
Empathy. I'd go with empathy, because that's really the emotion that I hope they'll, the book will evoke in them, because these are lives that are not very familiar, or they're not lived experiences for many of us, right? I mean, the life in the farm is not our lived experience. We might know of hobby farmers, or we might have read about farmers, when they've gone through like great personal tragedy or like, extreme success. So we don't know much about the everyday life of a farmer. So I hope that, by presenting this in a fictionalized way, people will understand and empathize with the lives of, the people who put food on our table.
Yeah. Deepa?
Okay. Admiration, I would say. Admiration for Nain Singh Rawat's guts, his powers of endurance, his never say die spirit. Because in a sense, he, while writing the book, for me, he became kind of an inspirational figure, because he tackled so many emergencies, so many tricky situations, and you can see the personal growth in the man. So I would definitely say admiration, and also think of him as a kind of a role model for, always keeping your cool under difficult circumstances.
Yes, Devika?
Rather than an emotion, I think what I would most like to evoke out of the adventures of the Kohinoor is a realization, because the main character, the main protagonist is a stone. It's not just any stone, it's a diamond, and it's not just any diamond, it's the Kohinoor, which more than anything seems to still strike an emotional chord with most Indians. Of all the crores worth of colonial loot that was taken away from India, the question you'll most often hear is, when are we going to get the Kohinoor back? Why is it not, why is it not in the National Museum in Delhi? So that emotion, when you go back into the history of the diamond, the historical references, the historical trajectory, it's a story that's so full of nasty ruffians and plotters and murderers, and there's torture and there's wars and there's general mayhem. It's such a thrilling ride. The realization that truth can indeed be much stranger than fiction.
Very true. It's in a sense a little bit of incredulity.
Absolutely.
How could this happen?
Yeah, exactly. But it did,
Yes. Truth is definitely stranger than fiction. And Nandita will tell us also, because she followed a piano all the way from Germany to Calcutta. And then
Yeah. The piano kind of moved a bit, yes. No, so I think I would like my readers to feel a sense of warmth, because the book is all about friendship and loneliness, and I feel it's just a very universal emotion we all share, loneliness and looking for a friend. So I hope, the kids who read it, they did feel a sense of warmth after they read it. So that's one thing.
Thank you. So let's now zoom out a little bit and look at the big conversations that are taking place across geographies and cultures. There are larger global dialogues to which your books contribute to in meaningful ways. So I'm going to start with you, Devika. How does the Kohinoor examine post-colonial history, and then also tell our young readers a little bit about revisionism?
I think the important question is who is telling your history? So in a post-colonial scenario, you would want to re-examine the history of empires. You'd want to question, you'd want to challenge what has been accepted history so far. Let me give you a quick example, the Bengal Famine of 1943. According to colonial historians, it happened because of the drought. And now we've had historians telling you that it had nothing to do with the drought. It had everything to do with colonial policies of taking away resources for the war effort, stopping imports of rice, starving to death 3 million people. The story of the Kohinoor came with its own ecosystem of myths and bizarre gossip. And it was literally a fog of mystery around a stone with so much of emotional connect. It was literally a symbol of India. And when you go into the history, you are rereading it from a historical point of view. You're getting historical inputs, you're getting new translations. So it's revised, you're re-looking at. I don't think any historian will ever balk at revision because that's the nature of history. That is the rigor of the academic history is that you are constantly looking for new information, new tools, new input, new evidence, but it's your intention in putting those out. And I think the earlier a child learns about this, about these tools of history and the rigor of historical academic inquiry, the better it is for the child, because then you find a true perspective of yourself in your present life. You question, you judge based on your own evidence. So I think that's really important.
Thank you for that. Actually, this is slightly off topic, but Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast called Revisionist History.
Yeah.
And the first one I ever listened to was on the Bengal famine. And I must have sobbed the entire duration of that podcast because I'd never known that part of history. And you're right, unless we tell our own history, someone else will keep giving us their version of events.
Exactly.
Anupam, Devika sort of talked about the politics of telling our history. There's definitely politics in your book, for sure. I mean, it's a mythology, but there's definitely politics there. So what is the larger global conversation that the young Pandavas are a part of?
Right. So, I mean, dealing with something like the Mahabharata is quite intimidating in the sense that not only is it, it kind of defines the word epic, right? It's one of the most epic epics out there. So it's got a lot of great stories, a lot of very complex stories, but it also comes with its own like social and cultural baggage. And that would be really, I mean, I found that to be very intimidating, but the way I kind of psyched myself up was to kind of realize and to tell myself that retelling the Mahabharata is something that is a centuries-old tradition. I mean, in that sense, there is no single Mahabharata. There are so many Mahabharatas. And it's our responsibility to kind of recontextualize these traditions to our modern sensibilities. And to that effect, I mean, one thing that was very lucky about my book is that it's told through the point of view of Sahadev, who is the youngest Pandav, and who happens to be the most thoughtful of them. And because it's told from a personal point of view instead of like an omniscient or an objective point of view, you get to question everything that's happening around them. So I think something like the Mahabharata, you're absolutely right that it's full of politics. It's full of a lot of identity politics, and it's all about where you came from, what your antecedents are. But then like you have to question the validity of a lot of these things, and I hope I've done that to some effect in the story. And I think that while I want to introduce kids to this great story, I don't want to contribute to like a calcification of their identity as whatever, whoever they are, whoever they may be. So I hope there are more questions than answers in the book.
Right, and then kids will find meaning based on what's meaningful to them. So instead of you telling them this is how you should view and interpret the Mahabharata or this particular story from this person's perspective, they must continue to explore further. Deepa, I want to talk about Nansing Rawat a little bit because he literally had to tread lightly. And what I want to talk about is how did you manage your own historical bias against a colonialist when you penned his account?
Yeah, this is a bit of a thorny topic. And well, I was kind of torn between awe at, what Nansing Rawat had achieved and the uncomfortable fact that he was a British agent. And incidentally, he was my grandfather's uncle. So this was a bit of a controversial topic within our family too. Was he a spy? Some people denied it fiercely. No, our relative cannot be a spy. But, I accepted that truth, that definitely he was, he was an agent, he was gathering information. But on the other hand, I thought it was important to celebrate what he had accomplished. It was a tremendous thing he did, mapping Tibet at a time when it was totally unknown and facing so much hardship and danger on the way. And on the other hand, there were also some attenuating circumstances, like he was in dire financial straits. He badly needed that job. And apart from that, at that point of time, there was not so much anti-British feeling in that particular part of the country. In fact, the British had been hailed as saviors because there was Gurkha rule in the hills and the Gurkhas were extremely tyrannical. So when the British took over, people actually welcomed them. So these were it was a bit of a complex issue. So when I was writing the book, I decided to focus on his journeys and his achievements and keep that bit about his being a British agent in the background. So that's why I was, able to work on that book without having, doubts about should I be writing this, or is it acceptable? These are all the issues an author sometimes faces. Is it politically acceptable? And let me tell you, it was not easy getting this book published.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you did because it's much needed. And wow, I didn't realize that. So I'm going to just talk a little bit more about identity and historical biases because they do go hand in hand. So Nandita, what did you learn about historical bias or biases, based on your piano's crisscrossing across?
Well, I won't really say, I don't think I would term it as a bias or anything, but what I did confront within myself also was how little we know about the Indians who fought in the First World War, Nobody knows about it. Very little snippets about it, but this is a war. 70,000 Indians lost their lives, close to 70K. Yeah? And how much do we know about it? We don't know. There are like endless graves throughout Europe, where like these Indian soldiers are lying there. But how much do we know about it? Even I didn't, and so this was something that struck me. And the second thing was, Indian women freedom fighters. Ask anybody for 5 Indian women fighters, freedom fighters, and they'll come up with 2 names. There are so many, and how seldom do we talk about them, or how little we have read about them. So these are the 2 things that kind of struck me when I was kind of writing this book and kind of knitting the story around it, and that was something that was like a prominent thing with me.
Very true. Thank you. So I'm going to now bring this conversation back a little closer to home. Aparna, your book is, we all talk about gender bias quite openly, but what I found interesting is that you kind of bring into the background the bias against educated people going into agriculture. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
So yeah, I mean, as you very rightly said, we have, gender bias, which we do confront, and we, have many conversations, we engage on the subject. But when it comes to farming, it is still, kind of unknown. And I thought that was important to have a woman as a farmer from the gender point of view, because when we say farmer, for many of us, for me, for the longest time, it was always a man who came into.
Yes. Oh, Aparna, you have been muted somehow, and I think we are being Zoom bombed.
Sorry, I think that was, yeah. It was, if it's a progressive farmer, it was, a man on a tractor. And then when I think of a woman farmer, the only thing I think of is like, a row of women bending down and then transplanting paddy. I don't see them as people with agency. So I did want to present, women farmers as people with agency. Not just do they do 70% of the work, they only own 13% of the farmland. And I think it's time we started having conversations about this. The other part of it, what you talk about, the educated, the bias of the educated people. So I think India, we have this head versus hand hierarchy where we value very greatly any skill that is, any labor that is mental, a skill that comes from learning, a schooled skill, whereas traditional knowledge is always dismissed as something like, people have it, but it's of no worth. And then like people who have, say, a degree in agriculture, for example, will go and tell a farmer who's been doing this for like umpteen years, that they've been getting it all wrong. For them, it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of survival. They're not going to get it all wrong. They know what they're doing. That's why they're in the business of doing it. But we have this arrogance that comes with education that rubbishes everything which is not, school. I think that is a real problem, because a lot of our history, a lot of our knowledge is oral knowledge, it's traditional knowledge. And I think it's time we moved out of this Eurocentric version of, what is knowledge, what is skill, those biases, to break those biases. And for that, we have to actually talk about the things that work, the traditional knowledge systems that work. And I think, hero it, so to speak. And I think in farming, we have many of those stories.
I agree with you. I don't think we need a study, across a population of 10,000 to figure out what actually works and what doesn't. Ami, I am so sorry. Janvi is Zoom bombing us, and we have to now move into the Q&A. So my last question to you on how the gods are going to save Earth, we'll have to wait for another time. Janvi, please, over to you.
I actually have only one question from the audience. If you do want to go ahead, Rasil, and ask this, and I am really sorry to be interrupting this really interesting conversation.
Okay, great. So, Ami, you get to go back to the skies, and the gods are at a loss on how they're going to save Mother Earth. Share with us what your book says about climate change. And the last question of the day is, has Greta read your book?
I can only hope. No, thank you. I was like, we can't forget Mother Earth. But, it's interesting because I feel like most of the world is now catching on to this idea of protecting the earth. But we as Indians know that gratitude for Mother Earth is actually really ancient. And I think my young characters realize this when they invoke the goddess Bhumi. So I kind of personified Bhumi as a goddess who loves to garden and feed people. And she can't stop being generous, even to the demons who are just like, take from her. So I think she's super interesting because she's simultaneously very powerful and extremely vulnerable. And I think kids can probably relate to that as well. And so the torchbearers have to protect Bhumi in the same way all of us do, which is individual efforts, planting those seeds, farming the land, giving back, and innovating creative solutions, saving animals. And I hope that people will kind of come away from that imagining Bhumi as more than just what we walk on, thinking of her as that ever giving, ever generous mother. So.
Great, thank you. Well, that's it for the Junior Readers panel today. A big thanks to authors for putting down stories that broaden our view of the world. I mean, if our audience thinks that they just wrote a book, this was not just a book or a story. There's so many layers, and I hope all of you spend some time reading them and rereading them and explore those layers. So now, no matter what the outcome at the end of the day, each of you is undoubtedly a winner, so good luck. And again, audience, stay tuned because we're going to young adult next. Thank you so much.